In episode 27 of the SOC Level 2 training series, we are going to go through the threat modeling exercise, and this video is all about threat modeling, and we're going to be using a few different resources to do it. We're going to be using a few different websites to actually pull off our threat modeling. We talked about it in the last video, which was the threat emulation video, briefly, but in this video we're going to go through some of the in-depth exercises for modeling the adversary of your choice and a few other exercises as well. So if you recognize that phrase, then you already know we're going to be talking about the MITRE framework and the MITRE attack framework and how it's used for threat emulation and threat modeling. And the overview of this particular video is going to be the introduction, obviously, to what threat modeling is. We're going to talk about the overview of it, modeling with the MITRE attack matrix, the MITRE attack framework, mapping with the attack navigator, which is a very cool tool, the DREAD framework, the STRIDE framework, the PASTA framework, and of course the conclusion. And the PASTA one, the first time I heard it, it kind of threw me off. I was like, pasta? Like, how does pasta sound threatening? But of course, these freaking hackers have to find a way to make everything sound, or like turn everything into a diabolical context, or like a perspective. So they took pasta, and now pasta has to do with cybersecurity and hacking and threats and modeling and all of that stuff. And we're not even talking about the gluten in pasta, which is American-made pasta, because I do realize that European pasta people don't even have like the issues that Americans have with our pasta, because we've been poisoned with our pasta, and you haven't been poisoned with your pasta if you're watching this in Italy. Like, I really want to try Italian pasta. Anyways, I digress drastically. We're going to be talking about threat modeling today. If you're serious about your CySec training and want access to me on Discord, consider joining Hackaholics Anonymous. We have 4 tiers: the supporter, agent, guardian, and master, and each tier gets their own Discord server and early access to content. The agent, guardian, and master levels get exclusive content, exclusive downloads, monthly Python automations, live streams with me every month, plus so much more. And to join, you can simply click the link in the description below, or you can go to our homepage and click the join button there, or you can go to youtube.com/@HankHacksHackers/join, and you will be able to join Hackaholics Anonymous. Now, without further ado, let us jump into the threat modeling video. The easiest way for us to be able to answer why threat modeling is important is to look at these types of questions. So we have: amid an ever-evolving threat landscape, is your organization prepared to mitigate potential risks? Do you proactively identify vulnerabilities, prioritize threats, and implement security measures to safeguard your critical assets? How does your approach to managing security risks contribute to maintaining customer trust? These are some of the questions that it kind of helps us understand why threat modeling is even necessary. It's even something that we should even consider. So when you are confronted with a sophisticated threat actor, are you confident in your team's ability to neutralize it effectively, or will these actors succeed in achieving their goals, stealing data from you, holding you at ransom, stealing your customers' data, denying services into your business, making your systems crash altogether? These are like very, very big conversations that we need to understand, and we need to prepare for them. As people who are on the defensive security side of things, we need to prepare for anything that may happen, literally everything and anything that may potentially happen, which means that you have to, the reason why threat modeling is important is because you're taking the proactive approach to security. You're not just sitting there reacting to things that come in your alerts and now you have to respond. You're proactively looking for vulnerabilities and different ways to attack your own infrastructure to see where your vulnerabilities and your weaknesses are, and then from there you fix your weaknesses. So in this room, we're going to learn to apply different threat modeling frameworks for reducing potential risks, and we're going to tackle topics like significance of threat modeling in building an organization's resiliency from threats, fundamentals of modeling a significant threat applicable to your organization for emulation purposes, and learning different threat modeling frameworks like MITRE attack, DREAD, STRIDE, and PASTA. The prerequisites would be the Intro to Threat Emulation, which is episode 26 of SOC Level 2. So it's literally the video right before this one. And then, of course, Principles of Security. If you've never seen that, you can just you can go to the channel homepage, to this channel's homepage, search for Principles of Security or Security Principles, and you'll be able to find that video as well. So that's it for our introduction. Now let's look at what threat modeling is. As an overview, let's look at what it is. Threat modeling is the systematic approach to identifying, prioritizing, and addressing potential security threats across the organization by simulating possible attack scenarios and assessing the existing vulnerabilities of the organization's interconnected systems and applications. Threat modeling enables organizations to develop proactive security measures and make informed decisions about resource allocation. Threat modeling aims to reduce an organization's overall risk exposure by identifying vulnerabilities and potential attack vectors, allowing for adequate security controls and strategies. This process is essential for constructing a robust defense strategy. So, threat, vulnerability, and risk. We need to understand what each one of these things are individually and how they all interconnect to each other. So, a threat is any potential occurrence, event, or actor that may exploit vulnerabilities to compromise information, confidentiality, integrity, and availability. It may come in various forms like cyber attacks, human error, or natural disasters. So literally an earthquake or a hurricane could technically be a threat. The vulnerability is a weakness or flaw in your system, in your application, or process that may be exploited by a threat, or your building. It could be a weakness in your building, and it may arise from software bugs, misconfigurations, or design flaws, or just lack of mitigation, lack of patches, any of those things. And the risk is the possibility of being compromised because of a threat taking advantage of your vulnerability. So if your building is in an environment where tornadoes and hurricanes are happening often, and you haven't secured your building from being destroyed by a hurricane and put together the proper safeguards to secure all of your critical systems, the risk of that actually damaging your business is very high, right? So that's like a kind of a very basic example, and it has to do with physical security. It's not about cybersecurity, but that's just one way of doing it. If we were to look at cybersecurity, if your employees are putting their work email addresses in their LinkedIn bio, and you're not enforcing any kind of a password policy where they don't have to have a complex password, they could literally just put 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 8 as their password, and there's no multi-factor authentication. That's a really big vulnerability in your cyber infrastructure, in your cyber posture. And the threat would be anybody that is roaming LinkedIn for email addresses that wants to exploit you, and then they can use something like John the Ripper and the RockQ text dictionary database, and then from there now they can hack into you because the weak passwords are so easy. There's literally over 15 million, probably like hundreds of millions of weak passwords that are stored inside of these password dictionaries online. And if somebody can find your work email, the next step is relatively easy for them to be able to, all right, let me find their login on their company website or whatever their application is, and then just run it, right? So that would be a high risk type of a situation. So to simplify it, we can look at it like this. The threat would be the occurrence of someone breaking inside your home and taking all your belongings. The vulnerability is the weakness in your home security, like a broken lock or open windows. The risk would be the likelihood of being burglarized due to living in a neighborhood with a high crime rate or a lack of an alarm system. And then combine this with this, and you are pretty much asking for that, okay? So this is what it's like. So understanding the difference between these three things is very important for threat modeling, and it enables the organization to effectively identify and prioritize security issues, resulting in a faster way of reducing risk exposure. So basically, you're looking at the things that have the highest risk, and then from there, you're working your way backwards, and you fix the things that have the highest risk first, and then the next one, and then the next one, until you get to all the low risk stuff, and then hopefully you'll fix everything. But at the very least, the critical risk, the high risk stuff needs to be addressed immediately. So the high level view or the process of threat modeling goes into these steps that we have right here, right? So these are things that you would do continuously. And we talked about this in the last video as well. We're just going to look at it in further detail today. So first, you're going to identify the specific system. This is known as defining the scope. So the systems, applications, and networks. So a range of IP addresses, a single IP address, an application, or a range of API endpoints, the systems, computers, devices, any of these things that are within the threat modeling scope, meaning you're allowed to look at them and analyze them to see what ways you can exploit them. That's your scope, right? What can we attack? What are we assessing and analyzing? That would be our scope. The identification of the asset would be diagrams of the organization's architecture and the dependencies that those architecture requires. So if you have a router, what is the dependency for that router to work? If you have 5 switches, what is the dependency for your switches, which would be your routers? If you have wireless access points, what is the dependency for the wireless access points, which would end up being the router and the switch? So it's like identifying all of those assets and then the dependencies of the assets, what they depend on to function and what other devices depend on that asset to function. So you're looking at hopefully a really in-depth diagram. It's also essential to identify the importance of each asset based on the information that it handles, like customer data, intellectual property, financial information. There's a really good section in the practical element of Network Plus, the Network Plus playlist. If you actually go and find that playlist on this channel, in the practical video, which is the last video, we actually go through developing diagrams and looking at different elements of creating a diagram. And we do it through this one website that actually creates diagrams. And then there's another tool, which is the packet tracer, which is like my favorite way of developing diagrams of the organization's network devices as well as their end devices. Then we have identifying the threat. So once you actually know what assets you have and what your scope is, then you actually identify the threats based on that list of assets. And these are the things that would actually impact those identified assets, like these cyber attacks, physical attacks, social engineering, insider threats. And your asset actually could be a human being. Like you could have a group of human beings that are critical assets, which every company has. Your employees are assets. They could either be your assets or they could be your liabilities. So you look at these people and you say, okay, have we trained you well enough? Are you actually an asset or are you a liability? And that could be the threat. It could be that they are not well trained and they don't know what's going on. Therefore, they are susceptible to social engineering attacks, or they're susceptible to somebody manipulating them, and now they can become an insider threat to your organization. These are all considered to be a part of your assets and a part of your scope. Honestly, like that it should be the case at least. Then analyzing vulnerabilities and prioritizing risks. So whatever vulnerabilities, these threats, you have the actual threats that could be attacking you, and then you have the vulnerabilities to these assets, the vulnerabilities of the assets, and then making sure that combining the threat and then the vulnerability and how critical those risks would be, you need to prioritize the highest risk stuff and fix those first, obviously. So analyze the vulnerabilities based on the potential impact of the identified threats in conjunction with the existing security controls. And then given the list of vulnerabilities, risks should be prioritized based on their likelihood and impact. Likelihood meaning how frequently or how likely is it? What's the possibility that this could, or probability probably, what's the probability that this could actually happen to us? And then if it does happen to us, how much damage could it actually cause? And that would be how you can calculate the severity of a risk. So then once you have this information, you start developing and implementing countermeasures. Do you need to patch them? Do you need to update your systems altogether? Do you need to assign security guards to a location, install cameras? Do you need to just make sure that you have automatic upgrades for all of your software and whatever you're using? So all of these things could actually be a part of your countermeasures, and you have to do regular assessments to try to figure this out. This whole process should be scheduled, and it should be done at least once a year, if not once every quarter, really. So Monitor and evaluate. Continuously test and monitor the effectiveness of the implemented countermeasures and evaluate the success of the threat modeling exercise. An example of a simple measurement of success is tracking the identified risks that have been effectively mitigated or eliminated. By following these steps, the organization can conduct a comprehensive threat modeling exercise to identify and mitigate potential security risks and vulnerabilities in their systems and applications and develop a more effective security strategy. This is a generic high-level process that we just looked at. Threat modeling will be introduced in the following tasks where we're actually going to look at some really granular types of steps that can take place. And then you need to involve these different teams, right? It's not you probably, like when you get a job inside of IT or cybersecurity, you will be a part of these teams. The management and the leadership has to ensure that these teams collaborate with each other and work with each other. But that's a really, really key part of this. There's, each team specializes in something, and they need to make sure that whatever they have learned through their specialty is passed on to the other team, and then the other team passes that information on to team A, and so on and so forth. And you combine your efforts, right? You collaborate with each other. Two heads are better than one, three heads are better than two, so on and so forth. And it's the same thing here. Two teams are better than one team, five teams are better than two teams, and it just goes on from there. So these are the teams that we have over here that are very, very important, and everybody needs to be involved. Everybody needs to be aware of the goal of security. So obviously there's the security team. So the red and blue teams, meaning the offensive security and the defensive security teams. The security team is typically the team that leads threat modeling, and they provide expertise on threats, vulnerabilities, and risk mitigation. They also ensure that security measures are implemented, validated, and continuously monitored. So this is the tip of the spear, right? The head of the spear for a threat emulation or threat modeling exercise. That's the security team. The development team works on the software, right? So they build the applications and the systems and everything that has to do with the digital infrastructure. And they need to know how to build secure systems and applications. A lot of times, development people are not focused on security. And it's up to the security team to emphasize that, hey, listen, as you're going through the software development cycle, I need you to focus on security at the very beginning in your design phase. So we don't have to go through production and deployment and then be like, oh, there are security issues here. And then you got to go back to the drawing board and start redeveloping things. So it's very, very important, right? So their involvement ensures that security is always incorporated throughout the development lifecycle. And then you have IT and operations. These manage the organization's infrastructure, including network servers and other critical systems. And their knowledge of network infrastructure, system configurations, and application integration is essential for effective threat modeling. Governance, risk, and compliance teams are also a really big deal because they actually tell you what laws and regulations you need to follow and why certain things should be safeguarded more than other things, where those things are more critical than other assets in the business. So they look at compliance assessments based on the regulations of your industry and your internal policies, and then they collaborate with the security team to align threat modeling with the organization's risk management objectives. The stakeholders of the business would be people like the C-suite executives. It would be people like potential majority owners, let's say. These are really big decision makers that most likely have zero experience in security, but they control the money. They control a lot of the directional decisions that are made in the business, which direction the business goes and how the business will grow, so on and so forth. And these are the guys that you have to convince that, hey, it's important for us to do threat modeling. It's important for us to do cybersecurity posture and make sure we have a strong posture. And it's important for you to invest in dollars and cents into this, because if the business gets hacked and we're held at ransom, or if they crash our systems, it's going to cost you a lot more money than it would to try to patch these things in advance. So their involvement ensures that the efforts align with the organization's strategic and financial goals. That should be in there as well. And then you have the end users, which is the users of your system application. These are your customers. They can actually provide insights to you. They can provide perspectives to you, and they can help you identify the vulnerabilities and risks specific to user interactions and behaviors. And it could be beta users, it could be test users, but it could also be your actual customer base as you continue to build the business, and you incentivize them to give their feedback to you by offering a discount or free product or free service, something like that, so that they feel invested in the business itself. And then if you're, a lot of times the end users, the customers themselves actually hold shares in the company as well. So they also want the shares to go up, right? They want the value of their shares to go up. So they will be incentivized in that way to be like, hey, if you help us establish a stronger business, then your shares will be valued higher. So this list is not limited to these teams and may vary depending on the organizational structure, and the collaboration of these teams is not limited to threat modeling exercises because they need to do everything else too. It's not just the threat modeling offensive security stuff. They need to work through every other element of security to make sure that the business itself is secure. In addition to the methodology that we've discussed, an attack tree is another really great way of identifying and mapping threats. And this is the graphical representation that's used in threat modeling to describe and analyze potential threats against the system, application, or infrastructure, whatever your assets are, right? So it provides a structured hierarchical approach, breaking down attack scenarios into smaller components, and each node of the tree represents a specific event or condition, with the root node representing the attacker's primary goal. For a quick example, we can look at this thing right here. So gain unauthorized access to sensitive data is the overall tactic, and then compromising user accounts with access to sensitive data, phishing attacks, password spraying, hunting. So under this technique, we have these sub-techniques. Under this technique, we have these, and so on and so forth. And we're going to look at this much deeper when we actually look at the MITRE attack matrix. But this is just an example of what it would look like to create an attack tree. And we can see that the root node represents the attacker's primary goal, which is gaining access to the sensitive data. And the first level of the child node represents different high-level strategies that the attacker might do. And then each node, meaning each sub-technique. So this is the first level that they're talking about. And then each node underneath would be considered a sub-technique. Breaks down into specific steps, detailing the attacker's possible techniques and actions. So in addition to the tactical traditional hierarchical structure, attack trees can also be organized as attack paths, which depict the possible routes or sequence of vulnerabilities that an attacker can exploit to achieve their goal. And we're going to look at that through MITRE as well. What is a weakness or flaw in a system, application, or process that can be exploited? That would be a vulnerability. Based on the provided high-level methodology, what is the process of developing diagrams to visualize the organization's architecture and dependencies? And this is available right here as we started looking at these pieces of it. It was right over here in these elements, the high-level process of threat modeling. So developing diagrams falls under asset identification, which we have here. And what diagram describes and analyzes potential threats against a system or application? That would be the attack tree that we just saw, and it could also be an attack path. So let's talk about MITRE attack. This is one of my favorite tools that is available to us as security folk. So what is the MITRE attack framework, in case you don't know? In case you do not know, MITRE attack is a framework that has been developed by MITRE, and ATT&CK stands for Adversarial Tactics, Techniques, and Common Knowledge, and it's a comprehensive, globally accessible knowledge base, and it's available for free, and it's a very valuable resource, and it's organized into a matrix. So instead of just talking about it, let me show you what this thing is, and I have Googled it so many times that it's literally part of my frequently visited. So if we go to the MITRE attack website, you literally can Google MITRE attack framework like that, and it's the very first link. And when you go to it, it automatically loads the attack matrix for you. So let me load that. I need to plug my computer in because it's slowing down because it's literally running on fumes. So 1 second. This is what the attack matrix looks like. And you can see that we have several columns. I think it's, I don't know how many columns it is, but we have definitely multiple columns here. It is 14. Yeah, we have 14 columns. And so it starts from the very beginning of the attack vector, or we could call it the attack chain. So the very beginning of an attack chain starts with reconnaissance, and then you start developing resources, initial access, execution, etc. So this would be considered the tactic. And then under the tactic, we have the techniques. And then the ones that have these little gray boxes next to them open up into sub-techniques. And this is really a great way to see what is fully available in all of the attack vectors that are available inside of MITRE. And these have been developed based on actual attacks that have taken place in the real world from different attack groups or adversary groups. And some of them have been successful, some of them were caught along the way, but they were all big enough and high profile enough where it got onto this list right here. There were attacks against countries or attacks against Fortune 500 companies, and some of them were very, very critical and did a lot of damage. Others, again, they caught them just in time, or quick enough, soon enough that they weren't able to cause like a lot of damage. But because of the fact that they did get their foot in the door or something like that, it was worth it to be like, okay, we need to address this and we need to disclose it for everybody else in the security community to be able to access. So there are a few different things that are available here. One big thing I'm going to list or point out is that you could do show sub techniques, and it'll just open everything. And then now you can see the full list of everything that's available here. And then we can do hide sub techniques, and then you'll just see the list as you have here. And then we can do either the side view or the flat view. And this is what it looks like with the flat view, which is, I mean, it's kind of the same. It's just that instead of expanding and things going outward to the side like this, you can see that they just drop down right below it. And that's what that looks like. So these are just the views that we have here. One of the key elements of this is what I really, really enjoy is when we go up here and when we go under CTI for cyber threat intelligence, and we're going to be talking about this in a little bit, so I'm kind of just like jumping ahead a little bit. When you go to CTI, you can go to groups, software, or campaigns, and if I click on groups, it'll show me all of the groups that have been documented inside of this database, and these are actual groups. These are real live groups that have done some serious damage, or at the very least some serious sophisticated attacks against countries or companies, etc. And so some of them have kind of nicknames, so Agrius, Akira, etc. And then the ones that they were never identified, so they don't have any nicknames, or they never identified themselves, they're known as APTs. And APT stands for Advanced Persistent Threat. And so it's like APT 1, 12, etc. This is like the only way that they've been identified, really. And so APT 33 is one that I know we're going to be talking about in a little bit. APT 33 would be the group itself, and then you open it up, and then you get this general description at the top, and it's an Iranian threat group or suspected Iranian threat group. The group descriptions could be potentially these names right here. These are the techniques that they have been known to use or has been attributed to them. These are the softwares that they've been known to use. And then we have references that we can actually go to in a variety of different external articles that are available outside of MITRE. And then when we click on any of these softwares or any of these techniques, it'll go deeper into it, and then from there you can actually start seeing detection and mitigation examples inside of those descriptions. So I'm not going to jump too far ahead because I do want us to kind of go along with the course instructions that we have right now. But this is MITRE, and it's a very, very, very powerful resource that's available to you, and I highly recommend you become familiar with it in case you have not gotten a chance to. Very, very useful stuff. You can learn a lot from MITRE. So it's organized into a matrix that covers various tactics, as you just saw, and techniques, and the framework includes descriptions, examples, etc. So we can look at the exploit public-facing application, which is one of the examples, and we may end up using it for the questions that we have. So these are the procedure examples that we have here, and there's a lot of procedure examples. There are a lot of mitigation, or at least multiple mitigations and multiple detections, of course, references that are available. And if we go on the left side right here, it falls under the initial access tactic. So the exploit public-facing application is a technique that falls under the initial access tactic. So technique names and details is what we just saw. It's at the very, very top right there. and it includes the attack ID, or the tactic ID, I should say, the T1190 that you see right here. Let me see right there, this thing right there. Subtechniques is no subtechniques. Initial access is the tactic. Platforms, contributors, versions, the created date, which is essentially the date that it was first documented or noticed. Then we have the procedure examples, which are the examples of how threat actors have actually used it. Mitigations would be how to protect against this technique. And detections would be strategies and indicators that can help you identify them, as well as potential challenges in detecting the technique. References are all the external sources, reports, articles that provide additional info. By exploring this, the contents of the MITRE technique page, you may gain valuable insights into the specific methods employed by the adversary to enhance the overall security posture and implementing the suggested mitigations and detection strategies. So when we want to use this in threat modeling, which is kind of the context of this conversation, right? It can be integrated into threat modeling by mapping the identified threats and vulnerabilities to the tactics and techniques described in the attack framework. So we can insert a new entry in the methodology after identified threats, which is that very, very first one. And then we can say map it to the MITRE attack, right? So it's not actually the first one. It's, what is it? The third step, I think. So it was scope and then assets and then identifying threats. So it's like right after identify threats, we can say, hey, let's map that threat to the MITRE attack framework, to the corresponding tactics and techniques. For each map technique, utilize the information found on that page, such as description, procedure, example, mitigation, and detection, to gain a deeper understanding of it and the vulnerabilities in your system. Or incorporating the framework into your threat modeling process ensures comprehensive understanding of the potential security risk. So this is not a bad thing to do just as a practice, like a regular thing that you do when you find a vulnerability or when you find some kind of a potential attack against your company or a threat against your company. It should be the first thing that you do when you go to MITRE and be like, okay, let me see if I can even find this by just going to the top right here and clicking the search button and searching for it. Let me see if I can actually find it, and let's see what else is associated with it. What groups have used it? How successful were they? What are there any mitigations or any detection mechanisms? All of that. So we can use MITRE attack for a few different cases, identifying potential attack paths based on your infrastructure. So it can actually map the possible attack paths that the attacker may take to compromise your organization. If you use Office 365, for example, all of the techniques attributed to this platform are relevant to your threat modeling exercise. So if you actually use Office 365, any attack that has happened against Office 365 is something you should pay attention to because it's available on MITRE, and there's a lot of them. So if we actually go over here and then go over here, search, and then click on this again, and then look at this, and then you can load more results, and then you can see load more results, and then load more results, and load, and there's so many of them, right? So Office 365 obviously is a really, really popular software, so therefore there have been very many attacks against Office 365, and it's something that has been constantly patched and is constantly being patched by Microsoft because it's one of the most attractive attack vectors for a threat group or a hacker. Developing threat scenarios, so you can actually attribute all the tactics and techniques to known threat groups, and it can be leveraged to assess your organization based on the threat groups identified to be targeting your same industry. And prioritizing vulnerability remediation, so for each technique, we can actually use whatever mitigations or remediations that are available for us to prepare ourselves or to patch our systems, right? So you can actually identify the most critical vulnerabilities to address right away and maybe even find some kind of a mitigation for it. The usage of this framework is not limited to what we just talked about, so there's a lot of other stuff. And to improve the overall threat modeling process, let's integrate the usage of Attack Navigator, which is the next thing we're going to talk about, which is very, very powerful. So what is the technique ID of exploit public-facing applications? So if we go back to the page for this, we can click or go right here, and it says T1190, which is the attack ID for this. Under what tactic does this belong? And so we go right here, and it says initial access. And that's it. Those are the only two questions. So now we can actually talk about the Attack Navigator. to go over the attack navigator, they've actually provided a virtual machine to us in case for whatever reason you don't have access to a web browser. But I'm gonna use my own browser for it because we could do all of these things essentially together. So instead of going through this information piece by piece, I'm gonna open up my browser. We're gonna go through MITRE directly together, and then I'm going to just read the instructions of the background and then follow the steps, and then we can just view everything as it's happening in real time instead of kind of going back and forth, or just reading the lecture first and then going to apply it. So I'm going to keep the instructions on my second monitor, and then on this monitor we're going to do the official display of everything and the demonstration of everything. Okay, so the link that they provided to us is the link directly to the attack navigator, is what you see here. Now, the attack navigator is not directly accessible from the MITRE or the attack.mitre domain that we see right here. The domain is a little bit different. So what we have is the mitre-attack.github.io. And the way that I got here is I literally just Googled MITRE attack or create a new layer MITRE attack is what I Googled. But you can essentially get there by doing MITRE attack navigator, which is what the headline of the page is. So if we click on that, we end up here. And this is basically where the instructions start, right? The MITRE attack navigator, this is available for free, and it says it's open source, and it's also accessible via this link, which is the link that again takes us to this. Now, the reason why they preferred that we use the attack box in the virtual machine on this specific room in TryHackMe is because the version that they used at the time that they created this room would be the version that they would like for us to use, so that it's more consistent. But I feel like it's going to end up being kind of the same, so I'm not really that concerned with it. So now that we actually have this, we're going to go look through the various options that's available here. So we have create new layer, open existing layer, create layer from other layers, and create a customized navigator. And so these are the options that we have here. So we're going to create a new layer, which is the essentially where the instructions take us, right? So creating a new layer, and we're going to do the enterprise attack layer, and it's going to open up like this, right? So this is, now we have the matrix, the full matrix is accessible to us right here. We could have also done a mobile matrix that focuses on threats and techniques against mobile devices. So let me go back and just kind of show that to you. Let's leave this site real quick. If we create a new layer, we have enterprise, we have a mobile for the attacks against mobile devices, and then we have ICS, which focuses on threats and techniques against industrial control systems. And these are the things that control warehouses or manufacturing plants, things like that. It could even be a nuclear power plant could use, and it does actually use, an industrial control system. So anything that has to do with industrial power plants, treatment facilities, transportation systems, manufacturing, critical infrastructure, any of that stuff, they use industrial control systems. So what we're going to do is we're going to focus on the enterprise stuff that is done against companies, corporations, countries, technically. So it all falls under enterprise, and this is it. So this is what the attack matrix looks like from here. So now what we want to do is we want to search for and select certain techniques. So under the selection control panel, which is available right here. So this is where we are. We have the selection control panel, we have the layer control panel, and then we have the technique control panel. So what we can do is under selection control, we can search for something, and I'll bring this whole thing up right here. And you can basically just start either browsing through these things, or you can search for something if you know the name of it, and basically kind of add it to your list of techniques that you want to start analyzing, right? So if we press the magnifying glass, which is what we did, we can see techniques, threat groups, software mitigations, which is what we see right here. For a quick example, we can search for APT41. So it can be under threat groups, which is available, and you can actually even select all or deselect all. You can do that, or you can just come up here and then we could just do APT41. Let me make sure that my keyboard is on. Okay, and then when we look for APT41, we can see that there are the threat groups that are associated with them. So right here, so if I click on select, I come back and then we can see that we have all of these different things that have been highlighted. It's a little bit tough because my browser just turned to night mode, and so now it's all these things stayed black, which is kind of weird that it did that. But so yeah, this is what it looks like when you actually select it. You get to see all of the various tactics and techniques that they used for their given campaign. And there's a numerical value that's also associated at the very, very top right here. We can see it right here where it says there's currently 108 techniques that have been highlighted. Now, in the notes inside of the course right here, we actually see that at the time of this recording, when they did this, there was only 64 techniques that were highlighted. So this is what they meant. And I think also the timing also has a lot to do with it as well, because the one that I'm looking at right now in this particular window that you see right here is the most recent version of the MITRE attack map, or the attack navigator. And so the reason, or the version that they ran over here, was the version that actually has 64 techniques that's associated with it. But basically, as far as finding the information and being able to like narrow things down, it's the same way, right? So we have 108 techniques, and then I can just deselect those 108 techniques by just clicking that X button, which is what we see right here. We can also right-click any technique if we want to do an action on that single technique. For example, select it, add it to a selection, or remove it from the selection. So if I go over here to any of these guys right here, I can right-click on this, and then I can add to selection or remove from my list of selections right here, which would ultimately remove it from this list of 108 that we saw right here, right? So you can do a few other things as well. You can pin it, unpin it from the tooltip. We can select all, we can deselect all, invert the selection, select annotated, select unannotated, select all techniques in the tactic, deselect all techniques in the tactic, which is referring to this piece right here, right? The lateral movement. So if I right click this, it'll select everything inside of that tactic, so on and so forth. And then I can obviously do view technique or view tactic, which would show us the details. It'll take us to that description page that we saw earlier. So we can view, sort, and filter these layers. We can export things, for example, getting a JSON or Excel or SVG type and export file that allows you to dump the selected techniques, including all the annotations. The data exported can be ingested again in Attack Navigator for future use from that main menu that we saw. We can also filter things, which allows us to look at things based on relevant platforms like the OS or applications, and we can click on this specific image just as an example here, where it says it'll show us anything that has to do with Office 365, for example, and this is inside of the layer controls. So this is now no longer inside of our selection controls. It would be inside of layer controls. So I click on layer controls, and then now we have these things where we can do filters, and then now we can filter something or view something based on these filters. So it could be LSA or LAAS, SA, I think that's actually an I. So infrastructure as a service, software as a service, Office Suite, also known as Office 365, identity provider, Mac OS, Linux, Windows, etc. So you can actually narrow things down as well. And we can, it comes automatically pre-selecting everything, but we can kind of deselect these things. And then obviously, as you can kind of see in the background there, all of this stuff gets updated as we select or deselect these things for our filters. We can export right here, also inside of the layer controls series of options, the control panel here, where you can do a single layer as JSON. We can do the Excel. You can also do an SVG export, and then you can only download annotations on visible techniques if you wanted to do that. We can go ahead and click on the layer settings here. So let me get out of that. We can change the name of the layer. We can change description, the domain that would be attached to it, metadata, links, the layout of the matrix, show names or show IDs attached to every single one of these things. And now you can see, again, it immediately updated everything in the background as we saw. Aggregate function, average, minimum, max, and the sum aggregate scores, which is also available to us over here. So if I zoom out, we can actually see aggregate scores for these. Let me see if we can, let me see where it would show up. So I don't know where aggregate show count unscore techniques. I know you can find aggregate scores, it doesn't show automatically. So I think that would be something that we would have to do a little bit of extra search on. You can sort things according to A to Z, for example. This allows you to sort the techniques by their alphabetical arrangement or numerical scores. The images show all techniques arranged alphabetically, and that's again available right here inside of the layer controls with the sort alphabetical, ascending, etc. Expand the sub-techniques, view all the sub-techniques, underlying sub-techniques under each technique, expanding for all of these. You can have a similar view, which is again available over here as well. So there's the expand techniques. I click on that and it opens everything available here for us, and it makes the output much larger on the screen. And then I can click that same exact button right here, and then it will expand the annotated techniques, and then it will collapse the techniques. And so there's expand, annotated, and then collapse. And those would be the three options. And then when we collapse, we end up back in our original view. The annotation of techniques is under the technique control panels, which is our last panel, and allows us to annotate details on the selected technique. For a quick run through, this is what it looks like. And annotation is just looking at various elements of it and kind of customizing the view of it. So let's do these things piece by piece. So we have the toggling of the state, which is available through that square. So I'll just kind of focus on one window, and then I'll go through all of these instructions, and then I'll show you what each one of these things actually do. So we have the toggling of the state. So we'll go to technique controls, click on that, and then we have toggling state right here. So this allows you to disable the selected technique, making the view grayed out. So if I go to any of these, so let's say I'll click on access token manipulation, and then I will click on that and it will gray it out. You notice how it got grayed out, and these have been highlighted. These are the ones that are still available for everything that we have under our given APT, and that one specifically got grayed out. And then as long as I have it selected, if I click it again, it will come back to its original view. So let's go ahead one more time and select it. And then we have the toggle state right here. Click on that and it'll bring it back up right here. So that is toggle state. So it allows you to disable the selected technique or re-enable it, as long as you just make sure you have it selected. There are background colors that will allow you to change the background color of the technique for highlighting and grouping purposes. So if you want to group something in general, you can go ahead and just highlight a given technique. So let's say we do privilege escalation, I guess, or maybe I think it's, let's see if I can do a hold of a shift. Yeah, if I do shift, I can actually select multiple things, and then it will allow me to, if I go back, let me go to layer controls or selection controls, and I will get rid of all of those things that we had previously selected. And if we also go to layer controls and then click on the settings, so that will go away, then I can do technique controls. And now I can click on, let's say, defense evasion or resource development, let's say. And if we have selection controls, all of these things have been selected again, which is very interesting. So there we go. I think it's like when I click on one thing and it highlights all of these other elements, I wonder if it's because they've been expanded or not. And they haven't. So that's the part that's kind of interesting to me. So let's say I just click on resource development, as you see right here, and it's only this specific column that has been highlighted. I can go to technique controls on the far right side again, and I can click on background color, and I can now highlight all of those. So now I have resource development, all of them have been highlighted, and that is, how we group that. If we actually click on privilege escalation, and now we see all of these things have been selected for whatever reason. So privilege escalation, and I want to accordingly go ahead and group them. Now I can group them by highlighting them according to a background color. So this is actually very useful, especially when you're trying to arrange something based on an advanced persistent threat group, an adversary group, to see which techniques they specifically ran. So once you go into one of these things, it'll actually highlight their group's vector. So let's go back to this APT33 that we had open, and I can just go here, attack navigator layer, and then I can just go on view, and it'll open it for APT33 inside the navigator. So you can see right here, we have APT33 selected. On this one, it's just the layer that we created by ourselves, and we're kind of messing around with it. So if I go over here, inside of this thing, all these things that have been selected, if I go to this technique controls, technically, so we can go here, I can click on that. I can, let me see if I can do control select. No, control select will actually get the menu for it. So if I do, I see, it's, for me it's command because I'm on a Mac computer. So I can do select on this, I can do select, I'm holding down the command button and just clicking on all of these things that have already been highlighted, and I can go ahead essentially and group all of these once I've selected them. Now it's going to be a bit of a time consuming thing, so I'm going to kind of time lapse this so you can actually see after I've done selecting all of these things. Okay, so I should have all of these guys selected. I go on background color, do a yellow. Oh, I didn't have these groups right here selected. That's so funny. I thought I clicked on all of them, but I mean, the ones that I did have selected, they got the yellow background applied to them. So that's kind of a way that you can go ahead and group these things together. Now, when you get into any of these APT groups and you're looking at the attack vector or the path that they took for their attack, it's already coming highlighted. So it's kind of a little bit redundant for us to go ahead and do it twice. But it's just a demonstration to show you that you can manually select a couple, go ahead and highlight those, or not, I guess. It's so weird. So let me see if I can kind of deselect all of these things. It's so weird. So let's go to selection control, make sure nothing is selected, and then go here and select these three, let's say, and then we'll go to layer controls, and then we will, or technique controls, and then we'll go ahead and highlight them. Okay, there you go, that worked. So I had to make sure that I deselected them. But again, grouping, right? You can color code things and you can group them. You can also score each one of these things, rate each technique or set of techniques based on criteria depending on your needs. And this would also be under the technique controls portion that we have right here. So let's remove the color that's available here, and let me see if I can zoom back over here. And so we have the scoring that we can assign to anything. So I can click on this for whatever reason, assign a score of 10 to it, and now it should have a score that's associated with it. And I can close that down, click on that, or highlight over it, and now we can see that it has a score of 10. So you can score these things. I can click back on it, click on scoring, and then remove its score, and then it will remove its score. So we can score things based on the relevance to our specific investigation or our threat modeling exercise. We can add comments to it, which is also available by this thing, and you can add an extra comment to it. We can add external links to these things by using this link button over here, and then it'll literally add a link to an external location or an article or any kind of resource that might actually be useful to you for your exercise, for something that's going on with your company. Maybe you want to add a link to the specific web page that it applies to, or the specific resource or something inside of your file share that it would apply to. All of these things would actually be very useful, because ultimately, again, once you've done all of this customization and you've added these notes and these color coding, all that stuff, you can actually export this entire thing, including all of the annotations that you've made to it, all the notes and modifications that you've made to it. You can also add custom tags and labels to these things. It falls under metadata. So I click on this, click on metadata, and I can add metadata to it, the name and then the value of it, and so on and so forth. And then all of these things can actually be cleared by clearing the button. So we can add a link, we can add comments, we can add a score. So let's say I'll add a score to our data transfer here. We can go and add a comment, and we'll say hi. And then from there, we can also, I don't have any links or anything to add to it. I can add a metadata, which would be value, or what is it? Importance, and then it'll be very important. And then there we go, we have that. And so now we can go ahead and go over this. Now we can see that we have a score, we have comment, and then we have importance, which is very important. And then I click on this, and then it clears everything for that thing, and now it goes back to normal. So these annotations are actually very, very useful, especially when you're looking at a specific APT's vector, just like we did over here, where we can literally just go ahead and remove, or we can group them by color, we can add scores, we can add comments, all of that stuff. It becomes very, very useful as you go ahead and do it. So we can, let's see what else we can do. For the exercise here, we actually now have an exercise throughout everything that we've done. We can actually combine all of this information that we've learned to utilize the attack navigator. And this will most likely be used for the remaining exercises that we have here. The answers that we'll get over here most likely will not be available in the version that I'm using, because I'm using the most recent version. So the answers are here for you, but what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and just run the exercise as if we were doing it. So we're tasked to utilize Attack Navigator for the threat modeling exercise. The organization we're working with is in the financial services, so that now we know some of these threat groups that are available for financial services. APT28, also known as Fancy Bear. 29 is Cozy Bear. We have Carbonac, Fin7, which is Carbonac and Fancy Bear, or Carbonac or Fancy Bear, and then the Lazarus group. So the organization that we're in also uses the following techniques, which is Google Cloud, online banking developed by internal developers, and customer relationship management, also known as CRM platform. So the critical assets that we handle based on the business stakeholders are customer financial data, transaction records, and PII, personal identifiable information. So given this scenario, we can use the attack framework and the attack navigator to map and understand the significant techniques attributed to provided threat groups and those affecting GCP and web applications. So essentially, instead of going to just the page for APT33 or APT whatever the number was, we can actually go to the navigator and we can go ahead and assign a value to all of them, right? So I can go ahead, let me do this. I will clear all of the annotations for this, so we can go to basics, we'll go selection control, we will deselect everything, and then over here we can just use all of those APT groups to add to our selection. So I can actually do APT28, and then it'll be under thread group, and it will select it, and now it has all of those things selected. I can now do APT29 and then go to thread group and then select that, and now it'll have, as you can see, other things are being selected as it goes through them. And then I can do Carbonac, right? Then go to thread group and select Carbonac, and then Fin7 is already here, so I'll just do Fin7 here as well. And then finally we have Lazarus group, and from Lazarus group we're going to get Lazarus, like that. Let's see. We'll go to threat groups, and then over here we have Lazarus right here, and then we can select Lazarus. So now we have all of these things selected, and it's a total of 242 techniques that have been applied to it. But we need to kind of narrow this thing down for the selection controls, which has to do with the filters that we can add to it. So we'll go to layer controls, and then we'll assign filters. Now the filters over here happen to be Google Cloud, online banking developed by internal developers, and CRM. So for this, what do we have? We have, technically, I think Google Cloud could be a container. It could also be software as a service. So we could do that, or we could do Office Suite, which let's see, let me zoom back out here. It doesn't have Office Suite that's listed on the technologies. So for this, we could just do, I'll remove Windows, I'll remove Linux, I'll remove Mac OS, I'll remove network, I'll remove PRE, I will remove containers, I'll remove infrastructure as a service, I will leave software as a service, and I'll remove Office Suite and identity provider. Once I do all of that, which is pretty much a lot of things that I've just removed now, for whatever reason, these things have like really been collapsed here. So I can just do expand, and then we can see all the stuff that's been expanded. Let me see, am I zoomed in? Is that what's going on? it's kind of weird, the page formatting. If you can see, it's kind of been like cut off at the top right here, which is very, very odd. But that's it, right? So from all of those things, we now have these layers that we filtered down, and from everything that we had previously, all of these things are now the only ones that are actually available. So we can go under this and we can try to background color these, and then we can see that these are all of the stuff that still stay relevant to everything that would have to do with our specific company. So this is just one way that we can go ahead and narrow this down, and then we can go back under selection controls and look at all of the stuff that we have already selected, and we can remove them just in case for whatever reason it might not be relevant to us. There are some ways that we can also even go further into the techniques that we can see over here. So for Lazarus, there are techniques that have been attributed to that group. So anything that might be relevant to us, we can either select or deselect. So log enumeration, I guess, may not be relevant to us. Disk wipe may not be relevant to us. Binary proxy execution, data manipulation may be relevant to us because we do have sensitive data that we'd be dealing with. So we can actually deselect these elements just for Lazarus, right? And then from there, it would update our count right here. The 242 went to 241. Things like that, right? And I can just go back over here from the thread groups that I already have. I can deselect all of them or deselect the ones that I'm already using. So I'm just going to deselect Lazarus, and then it would remove whatever techniques were available under Lazarus for us, so on and so forth. So one of the things that we can do based on the instructions in the exercise itself, they're talking about just using the APT28. So if we narrow it down by APT28, you can see right here that these are the ones that come pre-highlighted. And then we can even go further and, this is APT28. These are the ones that come pre-highlighted. And then we can go inside of the search, and then we can actually search for Google Cloud, because Google Cloud is one of the infrastructure that our company uses, and then we can use that as the technique that has been assigned here. So data from cloud storage, implant internal image, serverless execution, all of these things fall under a search for Google Cloud, because Google Cloud actually shows up for, or all of those techniques show up that have to do with Google Cloud, like in some capacity they have to do with Google Cloud. So once we've identified that, we should prioritize the potential vulnerabilities that may affect the system that handle the critical assets. And then some of these techniques that you may consider prioritizing would be exploiting of the public facing, which is this specific technique, and it would be available over here. And so I'm going to deselect everything, and I'm going to go to layer controls here, and we're going to go back and collapse all of these guys, and then we will go to technique controls, and we will make sure that I need to make sure that all of these things get wiped. So let me go ahead and wipe all of these things. Okay, I literally refreshed the page because for whatever reason these things were not reloading in real time. So let's say that we've figured something that has to do with Google Cloud, and we want to narrow it down to the techniques, right? So if we have a list of techniques, which again, that list of techniques that they had was only 10 techniques that have to do with Google Cloud. For me, it is now 19 techniques that have to do with Google Cloud. And so we can focus in on any of these highly critical techniques, for example, exploiting public-facing applications or privilege escalation, data from cloud storage, network denial of service. All of these things could be relevant techniques to us. So we could actually score these and say that these are the higher scoring ones. So if I go ahead and use as any of my techniques, so let's go ahead and find that the one that has to do with exploiting something. So let's go ahead, and it was exploit public facing or T1190. So I could just do that, T1190, and then it will show me the exploit public facing, and then I can select that, and it will be available right here. And then from here, we can select this piece and go to our technique controls, exploit public facing, there we go. And then I can add a score to it, and I can add a score of 10 on that. And now I have a high score to it. I can add a score of 5 whatever my score would be, I can add a score to that. I can go ahead and look for each one of these individual techniques or browse for them depending on what is relevant to my company, and I can start scoring them so that they would highlight automatically, and then I can start grouping these things, and then finally we can go ahead and export these using our export function that's under layer controls right here. So this is how you create a full-on report, so to speak, that has to do with that attack navigator, and it's very, very useful, especially when you actually have to do it for a company. And if you work for a company right now, just use your company and the industry that you're in as an example, and then start honing in on it. So if you're in financial services, you can literally start searching for exploits that have to do with financial services, right? So if we could go to search right here, this is kind of the way that it just starts, right? So finance, right? So financial theft could be the technique. So if I just type in financial, the very first thing is financial theft is the technique. And then there's a lot of different ways that these things can actually be relevant. So it says, you know, Operation Sharpshooter had to do with defense, government, energy, and financial companies, right? So Costa Rica campaign has to do with a large number of financial institutions. So there are a lot of different ways that you can hone in on either an attack vector or an adversary group or even a technique directly. And then from there, you can go to the attack navigator and start creating these like customized reports that would be relevant to your company. And these things are great for practice, but they're also a great way to demonstrate that you're studying and expanding your knowledge and skill set. And then you can demonstrate this to your boss or your manager the next time that you want to apply for a raise or something like that, right? So this is how you establish yourself as somebody who is expanding their knowledge, expanding their skill set, and actually doing something that would be directly relevant to your company. And let's say if you want to go into cybersecurity or security engineering for threat emulation, threat hunting, any of those roles, you would be able to use this skill set to prove your worth. So now that we've identified this, we're going to go through this. How many MITRE attack techniques are attributed to APT33? So if I go back over here, this is the one that was the easiest. So if I search for APT33, I can do Navigator, and then I can click on View, and it will open this up. Now for me, the controls that we have, we need to actually go ahead and look at selection controls, and then we will search for APT33, and then under threat groups, I'll select it. And then for me, let's see, it says 32 techniques. I think that's actually the right answer. Oh no, 31. So the right answer is 31. So ever since they created this room, there's been a new technique that's been attributed to APT33, which means that these guys are still functional and they're still operating, which is kind of interesting to think about. They haven't been caught, hence why there's no actual name that's been assigned to them. There's just Advanced Persistent Threat 33. Upon applying the IaaS, so Infrastructure as a Service Platform filter, how many techniques are under the discovery tactic? And so we can go over here, and since we have APT33 selected, I'll go to layer controls right here, and I'll click on filters, and the only thing that we want to have turned on would be IaaS, right? So I can turn all of these other things off, essentially, and I wonder if that number will actually stay the same. So under which one? Under the discovery tactic, how many would still be up here? So let's zoom out. Let me see if I could zoom out. And so there we go. Under discovery, I have 1. Okay, well, for whatever reason, this thing won't let me scroll down, which is actually very annoying. Let me see if I zoom out. Yeah, even if I zoom out, it's still, for whatever reason, it's not letting me handle it. So how many techniques are under the discovery tactic? The answer itself would be 13, and this is a continuation from APT33, so the answer would be 13. So if we have APT33 selected under selection controls, we can go ahead, or under layer controls, excuse me, we can go ahead and click on filters, and we can make sure that we have IaaS selected, and as long as that is selected, then we can see that there are it should be 13. This one actually has 1 highlighted, which out of the 14 techniques leaves 13, but they're asking how many techniques are under the discovery tactic, which makes me feel like they mean how many techniques are selected under the discovery tactic. For here, it looks like there's only one that's been selected for APT33, and it's a score of 1. So if we highlight over it, it says score of 1, comment is APT33, and then there's a link that's been attached to it. So that is the only technique that's been highlighted. All the other ones are not highlighted, which makes me feel like the answer should be 1. But in this case, it says the answer is 13, meaning if we, subtract 14 by 1, we're left with 13. So I don't know if that's what they were asking. It could be very, very different when you actually use the version of the MITRE attack navigator that they had provided to you at the very, very top of this, using the virtual machine, that was like from however long ago when they created this room. So that's pretty much it for the attack navigator. This is a very, very useful tool. You can have a lot of fun with it, and you can learn a lot from it. These are the actual answers to the question. So if you're trying to find the answers, you could do what I did, and then as long as you're using the virtual machine that they have over here, then you should be able to find the exact same answer. If you're using the version that would be on your own browser, it's going to be the most recent version, which is going to have obviously different responses that you would get. But these are the answers, and the way to find them is to go through the exercise the way that we just went through it. Now we can move on to the DREAD framework. The DREAD framework is a risk assessment model that's been developed by Microsoft to evaluate and prioritize security threats and vulnerabilities. And it's an acronym that stands for damage, reproducibility, exploitability, affected users, and discovery. So damage is the potential harm that could result from the successful exploitation of a vulnerability, and it could be data loss, system downtime, reputational damage, financial damage, all that stuff. Reproducibility is the ease with which an attacker can successfully recreate the exploitation of a vulnerability. They also call this attack complexity when you're looking at the CVSS scoring system and the common vulnerabilities and exposures database. It's very similar to that. So it's like, how easy is it for them to reproduce the attack? How complex is the attack for somebody to try to recreate it? And a higher reproducibility score suggests that the vulnerability is straightforward to abuse, posing a greater risk. A lower reproducibility score, meaning that it's not as reproducible. Exploitability is the difficulty level involved in exploiting the vulnerability, considering factors like technical skills, availability of tools, the amount of time it would take to exploit it. And the affected users would be the number or portion of users, or the segment of users that's impacted by once the vulnerability has actually been exploited. And discoverability is the ease with which an attacker can find and identify the vulnerability, considering whether it's publicly known or how difficult it is to discover based on the exposure of assets. Is it publicly reachable, or is it in a regulated environment? Those would be the two extremes that we can think about. So damage that can be harmed, or damage that can be caused, the harm that can be caused. Reproducibility, how quickly can you duplicate it? How easily can you duplicate it? How easily can you exploit something or exploit that weakness? Who are the users? How many users are affected? Obviously, the higher number of users, the more critical this is. The lower number of users, it's not as critical. And how easy is it for them to discover it? Can they just do a basic scan of your website using like the vulnerability script inside of Nmap or something like that? So the categories are commonly phrased with the following questions. Damage would be, how bad would the attack be? Reproducibility would be, how easy is it to reproduce the attack? Exploitability is, how much work is it to launch the attack? Affected users, how many people will be impacted? Discoverability, how easy is it to discover the vulnerability? Using the questions above, each category applying it in risk assessment context, you can use that as an assist for yourself. The DREAD framework guidelines, it goes based on, it's an opinion-based model that heavily relies on an analyst interpretation and assessment. The reliability of this framework can be improved by following some guidelines. So establish a standardized set of guidelines and definitions for each DREAD category that provides a consistent understanding of how to rate vulnerabilities, and you can support it by providing examples and scenarios to illustrate how scores should be assigned under various circumstances. Encourage collaboration and discussion among your teams. Constructive feedback from different members aids in justifying the assigned scores. And of course, use subject matter experts that would help, and their opinion should have more weight than somebody who's not a subject matter expert, obviously. Use the DREAD framework with other risk assessment methodologies and regularly review and update the chosen methods and techniques to ensure they remain relevant and aligned with the organization needs. Qualitative analysis using DREAD. It's typically used for qualitative, which has to do with, again, opinion type of thing, like a point of view. Quantitative would be more data-based and statistic-based. So rating each category from 1 to 10 based on subjective assessment and interpretation of the questions that we just went through. The average score of all criteria will calculate the overall DREAD risk rating. So we can look at this like this: the damage, minimal infrastructure information, minimal information disclosure related to client, limited PII leak, complete data leak. That could be kind of the score that's been assigned to it, right? So 2.5 would be minimal, 10 would be everything's been leaked, right? Reproducibility, multiple attack vectors requiring technical expertise, right? So it requires technical expertise to be able to reproduce this. Minor customization for public exploits needed. Little prerequisite technical skills needed to run the exploit. Users with public exploits can successfully reproduce the exploit, right? So that's the easiest way to reproduce it. That's like the highest reproducibility rating. Exploitability, almost no public exploits are available. Complicated exploit scripts available. Minimal technical skills required to execute public exploits. Reliable Metasploit module exists, which literally you select the module inside of Metasploit, and then you assign the IP address for the target, and then you just type run, and Metasploit will do everything for you. So you need to know nothing other than how to identify the version of the system that you want to attack, and then as long as you have the IP address, you can essentially just attack it, and that's the least exploitability skill required, right? Affected users, almost nobody or to a small subset, around 10% of users. More than half of the users and all users would be the highest level of this. And in discoverability, the significant effort needed to discover the vulnerability requires a manual way of verifying vulnerability. Public scanning scripts not embedded in scanning tools. Almost all known scanning tools can find a vulnerability, which makes it the highest discoverability rating. So given this, we can assess some known vulnerabilities in the application. Below is the example. So unauthenticated remote code execution has a score of 8. The damage would be 10, reproducibility 7.5, exploitability is 10, affected users would be 10, discoverability is 2.5. So I'm guessing we're getting the average of all of these things. And once we get that out, I think, right? Is that how they're doing it? So let me pull up my calculator real quick, and let's see if that's how they're doing it. So 10 plus 10 plus 10 plus 7.5 plus 2.5 equals 40, and divide that by 5. Yeah, that is 8. Okay, great. So they are literally getting the average of these scores. Insecure direct object reference, also known as EDOR, in user profiles has a score of 6.5, so damage, etc., etc., etc. Server misconfiguration leading to information disclosure, score of 5, damage 10, 10, affected user 0, discoverability 5. So this is the lowest out of the 3 that we just looked at here. So now what's left is to prioritize the vulnerability. So obviously you would get this one because the score is 8, and then you would go after that one first, and you would go after this one to patch next, and then this would be the third one that you would patch in that order. So what DREAD component assesses the potential harm from successfully exploiting a vulnerability? That would be the damage that can be caused. What component evaluates how others can easily find and identify the vulnerability? That would be discoverability. What DREAD component considers the number of impacted users? And that would be affected users. And that's it. Those are all the questions we got. So let us go into the STRIDE framework now. The STRIDE framework is a threat modeling methodology also developed by Microsoft, and it helps identify and categorize potential security threats in software development and system design. So it's a little bit different than the other category that we just went through, where it would probably look at more holistic approach. So the DREAD will look at more of a holistic approach to everything. STRIDE in this particular case is looking at software development and system design in particular, so a little bit more specific. This is what we're looking at: spoofing, tampering, repudiation, information disclosure, denial of service, elevation of privilege. And so the unauthorized access or impersonation of a user or system is known as spoofing. Unauthorized modification or manipulation of data or code is tampering. The ability to deny something is repudiation. So can they repudiate something, typically due to insufficient auditing or logging? Unauthorized access to sensitive information like personal or financial data, which would be information disclosure. The denial of service is the disruption of the system availability, so the service has been denied to legitimate users. And elevation of privilege is somebody that's able to elevate their access, their authorization to do something. And obviously they do it without permission. So it's an unauthorized elevation of privileges, which allows them to perform unintended actions. So the violation of this means what? So if they actually were able to pull this off, they were able to authenticate themselves. If they were able to pull this off, they have now affected the integrity of the file, right? If they tampered with the file, that means they were able to affect the integrity. Repudiation is the ability to be able to deny that they've done something, and non-repudiation means that they can't deny it, right? So it's undeniable. Information disclosure is they've disclosed it, so confidentiality would be that that was not happening. Like they can't disclose anything, everything still remains confidential, right? Denial of service means availability, right? So if they messed with the system's availability, the opposite of this would be that the system is technically available. I guess these are the categories, right? So these are the policies that have been violated. Authentication has been violated here. Integrity from the CIA triad has been violated here. Non-repudiation has been violated here. Confidentiality here. Availability here. And authorization has been violated here. So it also provides what component of the CIA triad, which is exactly what I just talked about. So it's confidentiality, integrity, availability. By systematically analyzing these categories, we can proactively identify and address potential vulnerabilities in the system, application, or infrastructure, which enhances overall security posture. So to understand this, let's dive deeper. Spoofing would be sending an email as an other user, so some user that actually exists. You send the email as that person, meaning you are impersonating them. You're spoofing your identity with their identity. And you would create a phishing website mimicking a legitimate one to harvest user credentials. That would be another way to spoof something. Tampering is to update the password of another user. That's tampering. Installing system-wide backdoors using an elevated access. That's tampering. Denying unauthorized money transfer transactions wherein the system lacks auditing. That's repudiation. Denying sending an offensive message to another person wherein the person lacks proof of receiving one. That's repudiation. Information disclosure, so access to misconfigured database that contains sensitive customer information, or accessing public cloud storage that handles sensitive documents. All of that is technically information disclosure. Information disclosure doesn't necessarily mean that somebody from within the company disclosed information about the company to the public. That may not necessarily be the case. It could be that the hacker got access to information that they were not supposed to access, and that is technically information disclosure. So denial of service denial of service meaning flooding a web server with a lot of requests, which allows the web server to actually crash or not be available, and now legitimate users can't access it. Deploying ransomware that encrypts all system data that prevents other systems from accessing it until you actually pay the ransom. So ransomware encrypts everything. Now you can't access it. You are denied access to that. And until you pay the ransom, everything is still going to be encrypted. That's basically another version of DOS. Elevation of privilege, creating a regular user but being able to access the administrator console, or gaining local admin privileges on a machine by abusing unpatched systems. That's all elevation of privileges, escalation of privileges. So these are various scenarios in which the categories can occur, and it emphasizes the importance of implementing robust security. Typical representation via a checklist is one of the good things here. It's kind of hard to see the checklists that are here, but there are actually checks inside of these lists that we can see here. So the scenario would be sending a spoofed email wherein the mail gateway lacks email security and logging configuration. So that's spoofing. It's literally in the description. And repudiation, where there's no email security and logging, so they can't deny it, right? So it's undeniable. Flooding a web server with many requests, that would be a denial of service. That goes under the denial of service category. Abusing SQL injection vulnerability, that would be the tampering. So SQL injection means you can actually inject something inside of the code, meaning an SQL kind of a request or a query, an SQL query could be injected. Therefore, you're tampering and messing with the system. And then you're getting information disclosure, right? So you're getting access to the data that's inside of that SQL database. SQL stands for standard query, right? So you're technically able to query a database using SQL and get data that you should not have access to. Accessing public cloud storage that handles customer data is also information disclosure. Exploiting a local privilege would be escalation of privileges or elevation of privileges, but it's also known as tampering, I guess, but this should be an elevation of privileges too. The exploiting a local privilege escalation vulnerability due to the lack of a system update, that should technically be an elevation of privileges, but it's also tampering. So, threat modeling with Stride. To implement Stride framework in threat modeling, it's essential to integrate the 6 threat categories into a systematic process that effectively identifies, assesses, and mitigates security risk. So this is the high-level approach to doing this. System decomposition. So you break down all your accounted systems into components, meaning you decompose the system essentially. And you break it into components like applications, networks, data flows, and you understand the architecture, the trust boundaries, and the potential attack surfaces. So this is one way to gain a handle on this, right? In threat modeling, this is how you would do it. Applying these Stride categories. For each component that you've done the decomposition for, you would apply the categories to it. Analyze the exposure to the 6 Stride threat categories and identify potential threats and vulnerabilities related to each category. Threat assessment, evaluate the impact and likelihood of each identified threat. Consider the potential consequences and the ease of exploitation and prioritize threats based on their overall risk level. Develop countermeasures, design and implement security controls and address the identified threats tailored to each Stride category. For example, to enhance email security and avoid spoofing, implement DMARC, also known as domain-based message authentication, reporting, conformance, is a technical standard that helps protect email senders from spam, spoofing, and phishing. DKIM is the domain keys identified mail, which is another security standard to make sure messages aren't altered in transit. And then SPF is the sender policy framework and an email authentication method designed to detect forging sender addresses. So you could technically do all of them, right? They're all email authentication and validation mechanisms that help prevent email spoofing, phishing, and spamming. Validate and verify. So test the effectiveness of all of these things to make sure that they are effectively mitigating and identifying threats, and even conduct penetration testing, code reviews, or security audits if possible. And then do it again, and then do it again, and then do it again. Continuous. This is continuous improvement. This is not something that you do once. This is a common theme. If you've seen any video that I've done on any topic in cybersecurity, you will most likely have heard this before. Continuous improvement is not like this, or cybersecurity in general. It's not just a one-time thing. It's not per event. It happens all the time. Your systems could be squeaky clean, everything could be perfect, you would still try to improve them, and you would still try to get ahead of all of the attackers and find the vulnerabilities in advance and then patch them and then do another scan and then do another scan and just continually improve. This never stops, okay? Just keep that in mind. So applying this, we're going to do it inside of a little exercise. We got a scenario here. So the e-commerce company is in the process of designing a new payment processing system. To ensure its security and minimize the risk of compromise, you are tasked to conduct a threat modeling exercise using Stride. All your assets are stored in a secure cloud infrastructure developed by the architect. As the leader of this initiative, you will be working with different teams to create a thorough threat modeling plan. You aim to identify potential security threats and protect your payment processing system, ensuring the safety of your customers' information. These are the guides. So development team, system architecture, and this is what they do, right? So I'm not going to read them right here. I guess I should. So development team is responsible for building systems and applications. System architecture is responsible for designing the overall architecture of the cloud services. Security team, expertise on threats, vulnerabilities, risk mitigation. Business stakeholder provides valuable input on critical assets, business processes, ensures alignment between the initiative and the organization. And then network infrastructure manages the organization's network infrastructure, including servers and critical systems. So we are going to go ahead and click the view side button at the top and then answer the questions to be able to get the flag. I believe there's a flag, right? Let me see. Yeah, there's a flag at the end of this. Okay. So first, answer these questions. What foundational information security concept does Stride work with or build upon? And that is the CIA triad: confidentiality, integrity, and availability. That's CIA triad. If you've never heard of that, then you should not be in SOC 2. You should go back to SOC 1 and start from the very beginning. What policy does information disclosure violate? So information disclosure is talking about confidentiality. Information should remain confidential. It should remain secret, right? Non-accessible. That's what that means. So if you're disclosing information, or if information is being disclosed, it's no longer confidential. Which Stride component involves unauthorized modification or manipulation of the data? And that would be tampering. They're tampering with the data. So there's that. And then we have which Stride development or component, refers to the disruption of the system's availability, and that would be denial of service. And then we have the flag. So let's go through the exercise and get the flag. Let me zoom out. Come on, buddy. There we go. All right, cool. So we are now zooming out. We're going to go to this button, click view site. Now we have the site. And what's going on? So I got this. And what is it? Oh, I see. I can click on these things. There we go. So let's go in. You're already late. It's 11 a.m. You must finish meetings with different teams for collaboration before submitting the threat modeling at 5. You will find appropriate employees between 11 to 4. 4 p.m. is the time that you need to work on the presentation. Keep an eye out on the timer. We basically need to finish by 4 and submit it at 5. Navigate around the office. Caution: in case you go to the wrong room, cafe, or CEO room, an hour will be added to your time, resulting in a late submission. So let's not go to the cafe or the CEO room, basically. That's what we need to know. Okay, so what is it? What are we doing here? Is there a question or something? So software development does what? Hello, can you provide an overview of the application architecture? Sure, we have the following: registration, authentication, user dashboard, search functionality, payment. Got it. I'll coordinate. Thank you for the insights. Great. Okay, so let's go into the next room. It's already 12. Information security. Can you help me identify potential threats and vulnerabilities to the organization, including all infrastructure? Our web application and its infrastructure can be targeted by threat actors, which can do DDoS, SQL injection, brute forcing of credentials, enumeration of exposed assets. Okay. In addition, the internal network can be infiltrated with phishing attacks containing malicious payloads that may affect the employee workstations. Okay, great. It's already 1 o'clock. Brilliant. Network infrastructure. Can you provide information about this? Sure, we have database servers, firewalls, mail servers, file servers. Great. Although we were still working with the logical functionality. In addition, most of the workstations are Windows 10, and we're pushing to have an automated way of pushing security updates to the assets. And it is now 2 o'clock. Let's not go to the CEO room or the cafe. Let's go to software development. You already visited this room. Try to coordinate with another team. Okay, so what am I doing here? System architecture. Didn't I already visit this? Oh, I see. Can you provide an overview of the e-commerce application? They run Amazon EC2, relational database service, Amazon S3, simple storage, elastic load balancer to handle traffic distribution, but they're still in the works. Great. We visited information security, strategic planning. What are the critical assets and processes? And we have personal financial data, secure the transaction processing, ensure availability, integrity. Okay. Thank you so much. Presentation time, and it's already 4 p.m. I need to finish the plan. Prepare presentation. Okay, so insecure web application leading to SQL injection is definitely tampering. We'll even say information disclosure. So we'll do that. All the insecure AWS insecure AWS infrastructure, Without load balancers, it could be definitely denial of service. Load balancers implies denial of service and information disclosure. I already talked about that because S3 buckets are the storage buckets. So that's, I think, pretty solid. Mail server with no logging, that's been enabled. So that's spoofing. And logging actually is repudiation as well. So they can't deny it, right? So if there's no logging, that means they can technically deny that they did it. That's what the logging allows them, prevents them from doing. So if there's no logging, that means they can deny it and nobody can say any otherwise because we didn't have any logs. And then spoofing has to do with the mail server part of it. And then the unpatched employee workstations could be tampered with. And then, of course, we can elevate privileges. I would say spoofing is also one of them, but okay, we'll leave it at that. Just another day at work, success. Oh, there you go. All right, so if you actually do it right, then you get the flag. And you can just replay this portion to go ahead and find the right answers. So boom, there we go. There is the flag. And now we can move on to PASTA, the PASTA framework. PASTA stands for Process for Attack Simulation and Threat Analysis, and it's a structured, risk-centric threat modeling framework designed to help organizations identify and evaluate security threats and vulnerabilities within their systems, applications, or infrastructure. It provides a systematic 7-step process that enables security teams to understand potential. Like, this feels like something that was taken from their Wikipedia page or something, and they just copy pasted it over here. Like, there's no way that somebody writes like this. It's like from the description page of the PASTA framework. That's what I imagine that they got this from. So this framework was created by Tony, oh my God, Uceda Vélez. I think that's how you say that. And Marco Morana, much easier name. They introduced the PASTA framework in their book, Risk-Centric Threat Modeling, Process for Attack Simulation and Threat Analysis. And this was published in 2015. So if they're still teaching this, I'm guessing there's something to this. It's a 7-step methodology. Define the objective. So establish the scope of the threat modeling exercise. We've talked about something similar to this. Define the technical scope. So the first one is the objective, meaning you have the scope of the exercise, identifying the system, application, and networks. Then we have the technical scope that creates the inventory of the assets like the hardware, software, and data, and develop a clear understanding of the system architecture, dependency, and data flows. Decompose the application, so break it down into its components, identify entry points, trust boundaries, and potential attack surfaces. And it includes mapping out data flows and understanding user roles and privileges within the system. Analyze the threats, so identify potential threats to the system by considering various threat sources like external attackers, insider threats, accidental exposures. And this involves leveraging industry standard threat classification frameworks. Vulnerabilities and weakness analysis. So after you've analyzed the threat, you want to analyze the vulnerabilities and weaknesses. So any misconfigurations, software bugs, unpatched systems, anything that the attacker could exploit to achieve their objective. There are tools and techniques that we can use this, like static and dynamic code analysis or pen testing, and all of these things can be employed during the vulnerability and weakness analysis. And unless you're really, really good at coding, more likely you're not going to do static coding. More likely you're going to do dynamic coding or dynamic code analysis, because there are tools available for it to be able to you'll run the application and the tool will scan the application as it's running. There are static analysis tools as well. But for the most part, from what I've learned or what I've studied previously, I should say, static analysis usually has a lot to do with you looking at the code, although there are tools that can analyze it for you. And one of the more common ones that came up recently, one of the more modern ones, is a tool like GPT or Google Gemini, where you can actually attach a file and say, hey, analyze this code and analyze this file and tell me where any vulnerabilities or weaknesses exist. So that's a very, very powerful tool that's available for free to everybody right now. And you should be using that. If you're in code or development of any kind, you should always check your code against GPT or Gemini or any of these tools that allow you to actually attach a file for them to analyze and see if you have any vulnerabilities in your code. There's nothing wrong with that. Then you analyze the attack, so simulate potential attack scenarios and evaluate the likelihood of it. It helps determine the risk level associated with the threats, allowing security teams. So this would be one of the things that you could potentially do if you have to simulate something, especially. You can do this on the MITRE attack navigator. And then risk and impact analysis, develop and implement appropriate security controls, countermeasures to address these risks, such as updating software, applying patches, implementing access controls, etc. So the guidelines we can see right here. And what I'm going to do, instead of just reading through all of this, because it feels like it's just a lot of word vomiting. So if you want to read through this, feel free to pause, and I'll go for each section, and I'll give you a couple of seconds to pause it and read through it. So here we go. Define objectives and define technical scope. 3, 2, 1. Moving on. Decompose application and analyze the threats. 3, 2, 1. Moving on. Vulnerability and weakness analysis, analyze attacks. 3, 2, 1. Moving on. And then risk and impact analysis. 3, 2, 1. Moving on. Excellent. Benefits of using Pasta. It's adaptable to unique objectives and helps organizations align with compliance requirements. Pasta fosters collaboration between stakeholders. Methodology helps organizations meet compliance requirements by systematically identifying and addressing security risks. And the primary reason is that it's comprehensive and systematic and ensures thorough analysis of the entire risk landscape. So application of this is going to be done in our scenario. Online banking is what we got, catering to many users across the Asia-Pacific region. To ensure resiliency to potential threats, you are tasked to conduct a threat modeling exercise using Pasta. We're going to be working with different teams to create a thorough modeling plan. Together, you aim to identify potential security threats and online banking. As a guide, we have these teams: development, system architecture, security, business stakeholder, and we got to follow the 7 steps. So it's a couple of questions before we actually get to the flag here. So in which step of the framework do you break down the system into its components? That's decomposition. So you decompose the application. During which step do you simulate potential attack scenarios? That would be analyzing the attacks themselves. In which step of Pasta do you create an inventory of assets? That would be at the very beginning, which is the technical scope. So if you have an inventory of assets, you're looking at the technical scope. Define the technical scope and provide the flag for the simulated attack. So let me now zoom back out and let's open our site, this external, not external, but the site button that we have here. All right, I'm gonna do this right. Here we go. Strategic planning, cool. System architecture, okay, cool. Software development, okay, cool. Information security, okay, great. So strategic planning is first. System architecture is second, software development is third, information security would be fourth. All right, almost done. The last thing I need to do is someone who can provide the potential impact of the identified risk to the organization. And that will have to be probably strategic, right? Okay, strategic, great. All right, there we go. All right, so strategic planning first, system architecture second, software development third, information security was fourth, and then back to strategic planning was the fifth one. All right, great. Whew. Okay, here we go. What should be the top priority for the online banking platform as mentioned by the business analyst? Oof, I just knocked over my drink. Okay, great. It was empty. Thank God. All right, so what's the priority for the online banking platform as mentioned by the business analyst? Maximizing profits, protecting customer personal financial data, improving online banking user interface, protecting financial data. Okay, great. According to the system architect, what are the primary technical assets of the online banking system? So this is the EC2 RDS S3 services. Cool. What components of the application did the lead developer highlight during the decompose of the application? The user registration, account management, fund transfers, bill payments. Yeah, that whole long end. Yep, that was the one. According to the security engineer, which type of threat is not considered for the online banking? So brute forcing is considered because they can log in. SQL injection can also work. Social engineering I'm gonna say no. I'm gonna say social engineering is not the one. Okay, cool. We're making some good progress. So, which vulnerability was mentioned by the security engineer as a potential issue for the online banking platform? So, cloud infrastructure misconfiguration, unpatched systems, lack of multi-factor authentication. I think I actually like breezed through that one. I am going to venture a guess here, and we'll say cloud infrastructure because they're using Amazon Cloud. So yeah, okay, cool. According to security engineer, which mitigation strategy does match the identified threats? Account lockouts, spam email filtering, implementing CSRF tokens. So cross-site request forgery, I don't think would apply here. Spam email filtering would be more on the phishing and social engineering stuff. So the account lockout would be the big thing that we can. Okay, excellent. And what do we have in the risk and impact analysis? What potential consequence of a successful attack was mentioned by the business analyst? Unexpected system upgrades, consequence of a successful attack, no. A slight decrease in stock prices, that wouldn't be it. Financial loss and yeah, that's probably it. Okay, just another day at work. There we go. We got the flag. Okay, cool. So I'm going to cut out all the BS, and then what you're going to see is the successful application of this whole thing. So just to save time, because I don't want to keep showing you all the mistakes I made. But by the time that you see this, just know I made a lot of mistakes to actually get to this point. So what you've seen was the most successful version, was the successful version. And you just copy the flag, and then you get out of here, and then there we go. It's been a while since I've done this room, so I had no idea what the heck I was doing. And I think probably the last time that I did it, I also like went through so many freaking errors. And by the time that I made it, I was like, oh my God. Okay, cool. So let's just do the conclusion real quick and we'll be done. You will be dismissed for the day. All right, in conclusion, these are the things that we covered. We covered the MITRE ATT&CK framework. We covered the DREAD framework from Microsoft. We covered Stride from Microsoft. We also covered Pasta. That is not from Microsoft. That's from those two developers that went through it. And I mean, it's a very great review for me because I did get a chance to complete this, I think, way back at the very beginning when I started the SOC level 1 stuff. And it's just a nice review to be able to look at these things. My favorite out of all of this is MITRE ATT&CK, and obviously I mentioned it a couple of times and you saw why, because it's just such a very, very powerful resource, a very powerful tool. These frameworks are interesting as well. DREAD is more, it says supposed to be that it's numerical and calculated, but that was the one that was qualitative from what I remember. The Stride shines in structure and methodology, allowing for a systematic review of the threats. And Pasta supposedly is the most comprehensive of these whole things. The exercises themselves at the end were the ones that I think that were the biggest challenge of this whole thing, because it was mostly like a lecture type of a video, and I had to go through several iterations of those exercises to try to figure out what the right combination of the answers were, because it was a little bit tricky. But hopefully you were able to wrap your head around the overall concepts of these. I do know that I read pretty quickly through them. I kind of get a little bit impatient when there's so much reading to do, and it's almost like I just want to like leave the text on the screen for you and then you just read the text, which is it's like it's one of the I like doing things instead of just reading through stuff. And when there's just so much stuff to read, it just kind of becomes a little bit it almost feels like it's redundant. So anyways, this is all the stuff that we went through, and these were all frameworks that are used for threat modeling, right? So I would say, as far as the concept of threat modeling itself is concerned, I think the most powerful framework is the MITRE ATT&CK framework, mainly because it's interactive. You can actually use real life situations to be able to analyze potential vectors that you can take to attack a specific system or a company or something like that. So if you're trying to emulate threats, or if you're trying to model threats against your company, then I would use the MITRE ATT&CK framework. That's just me. you are more than welcome to try to use any of these other ones. And of course, you can just Google more information about them to try to get as much information about these individual frameworks as you possibly can. If you're interested in MITRE, there's multiple videos on this channel that have to do with MITRE, and you can learn about the MITRE attack matrix and the different ways to use it. So yeah, that's pretty much it for this one. The next room that we're going to go into, the next video, is going to be the Atomic Red team, and then the Caldera rooms to actually practice these exercises that we went through, which is where I think where the fun kind of starts kicking in. But that's it. That's pretty much for this one. Once you are finished with this room, you can click that final correct answer, and you'll be done, and you will officially be done with the threat modeling room, the threat modeling exercises. If you found this video useful and you would like to get more videos like this one, especially as we go along the SOC level 2 pathway, I encourage you to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so that you get notified the next time that a video comes out, especially in SOC level 2. And we're going to go deeper into it. I already started the Pentest Plus playlist, and that's a really big one. It's based on the CompTIA Pentest Plus 003 guideline for the Pentest Plus examination. So that's a really strong playlist that I'm really excited about, and that's going to be coming out once a week every Friday. Episode 0 and episode 1 have already been uploaded, and they are available to everybody that's inside of the Hackaholics Anonymous community. And if you're interested in that, I'll show you how you can join that in a quick second. But at the very least, make sure that you like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so that you get notified the next time that a video comes out on this channel. And of course, drop a comment if you have any questions about everything that we went through today, or in general, if you just have any questions about any of the content on this channel. Feel free to hit me up in the comment section. I am very responsive in the comment section, and I love getting comments from the community. So I would love to hear from you. If you just want to say hi, that's awesome. If you have a question, that's amazing. And if it's a really big question, then I'll go ahead and create a video in response to your question. So like, subscribe, turn on the notification bell so that you get notified the next time that a video comes out on this channel. If you're serious about your CySec training and want access to me on Discord, consider joining Hackaholics Anonymous. We have 4 tiers: the supporter, agent, guardian, and master. Each tier gets their own Discord server and early access to content. The agent, guardian, and master levels get exclusive content, exclusive downloads, monthly Python automations, live streams with me every month, plus so much more. And to join, you can simply click the link in the description below, or you can go to our homepage and click the join button there, or you can go to youtube.com/@HangHacksHackers/join, and you will be able to join Hackaholics Anonymous. I hope I see you in the Discord chats. If not, I hope I see you in the comment section. And that is it for today. You're officially dismissed. It's your boy Hank Hackerson at Hank Hacks Hackers, your favorite network and system attacker/protector. If no one else loves you, Hank loves you. Love, peace, and chicken grease. And I'll see you in the next video later.